Good morning. So today we're continuing with Dale Jordan's Dyslexia in the Classroom. We're on Chapter 3, Auditory Dyslexia in the Classroom, which is the more common phonological awareness problem that we hear about so often today. An occupational dread of vocal music teachers is the monotone child who can't carry a tune in a bucket. No matter how much musical drill such a student endures, he never learns to cope with vocal music skills. Fortunately, these tone-deaf children can be assigned to the stage crew or asked to hand out programs at the door. Unlike vocal instructors, reading teachers do not have alternatives for handicapped students. Auditory dyslexia is similar to tone deafness. It's not the same, but it's similar. The disability has little to do with hearing acuity, as many dyslexics exhibit keen hearing abilities outside the classroom. Auditory dyslexia refers to the inability to distinguish separate or discrete elements of spoken language. Since the child does not perceive the components of oral language accurately, he is unable to associate speech sounds with traditional spelling symbols or patterns. This ability makes it difficult for the student to write down his thoughts according to traditional standards of usage. Auditory dyslexics usually do not master phonics because they do not comprehend or perceive sound-symbol relationships accurately. Auditory dyslexia syndrome. When diagnosing this disability, teachers must keep in mind that few students master all the sound-symbol relationships of American speech. Most of us exhibit certain areas of phonetic weakness. The classroom teacher, however, can learn to identify those students who cannot encode oral language into written form. When attempting to read, the auditory dyslexic fails to recognize that the written forms stand for words he uses fluently in daily speech. A primary characteristic of auditory dyslexia is the inability to comprehend variations of vowel sounds. Most reading programs emphasize the long and short sounds of 5 vowels: A, E, I, O, and U. Although W and Y are also added to the vowel category, teachers do not always teach specific sound values for these semi-vowels. Educators have generally assumed that intelligent children with no obvious speech defects should have no difficulty discriminating the long sounds from the short sounds. This is not the case with perceptually impaired students. Auditory dyslexics have great difficulty distinguishing such close words as big and beg, or cat and cot, unless the words are used in a meaningful context. For the dyslexic child, subtle distinctions in sound values do not exist. A similar problem is evident when dyslexic students encounter consonant clusters, also called blends and digraphs. Few auditory dyslexics can identify the separate consonant elements in such clusters as ST, SP, GR, or PL. Dyslexics usually can identify the initial letter in familiar words. It is frequently impossible, however, for them to identify the second or third element in clusters such as STR, as in string, SPL, as in splash, and SHR, such as Shrek. It is common for auditory dyslexia to remain undetected during the primary grades, particularly when formal phonics and spelling instruction are postponed until grade 3. Nearly all beginners' pupils stumble in their first encounters with organized reading and writing instruction. When the whole word or sight memory approach is used in primary grades, teachers can remain unaware that certain pupils are not perceiving discrete sounds and symbols accurately. Hopefully we're not using whole word and sight memory programs anymore. Confusion with words alike or different. One of the earmarks of auditory dyslexia is the student's inability to tell whether words are the same or whether they are different. Mary is a typical child handicapped by auditory dyslexia. Her teacher has begun to suspect that she does not perceive word elements accurately. Because she is a resourceful person, the teacher has devised a simple listening test to estimate Mary's perceptual accuracy. Below is a sample of the child's performance. And this is the teacher talking. Mary, listen carefully as I say each set of words. Tell me alike if the two words are exactly the same. Tell me different if the words are not exactly the same. So the teacher says bed and dead. Mary's response is different. Dime, time. Mary says alike. Back, pack. Alike, says Mary. Look, look. Alike. Tam, dam. Mary says alike. Pain, bane. She says alike. Dill, bill. Different. And most of these she gets wrong, actually. Say, say. That should be alike, and she gets that right. Fat, that. Alike. No, no. She gets that one right. Hot, what? She gets it wrong. Vetch, fetch. She gets it wrong. Mile, Nile. She claims it's different. She's got right on that one. Wear, hair. She claims it's alike. It's not. Got, got. And she gets that one right. A frustrating tendency is sometimes encountered in an activity of this nature. Many dyslexics do not follow instructions well enough to respond with the stereotyped phrases expected by the teacher. Instead of saying alike or different, Mary might say yes or no, or same and not the same. Such behavior should not be regarded as incorrect. The point is to find out whether the child perceives sounds accurately, not whether he parrots back stereotyped answer codes. Much of the misery in the classroom between dyslexics and teachers results from the adult's failure to interpret the child's confused signals correctly. This kind of informal diagnosis reveals some significant deficiencies in Mary's auditory perception. The teacher now has definite guidelines for corrective teaching. This brief activity has revealed the child's confusion with 4 sets of similar sound elements: D and T, B and P, F and V, H and HW. The teacher will be alert for other areas of faulty perception as she guides Mary's reading and spelling growth. Teachers, however, must be cautious in placing faith in the results of tests like this. Many auditory dyslexics can make perfect scores on such oral, meaning ear, screening instruments. A score on auditory discrimination tests neither establishes nor eliminates a dyslexic condition until other symptoms are also identified. Confusion with spelling. Auditory dyslexia is usually the primary cause for habitually poor spelling. Because the student does not distinguish discrete sounds accurately, he has no dependable way to remember how to spell. Traditional spelling instruction has been seriously detrimental to auditory dyslexics. When an arbitrary list of unrelated word forms is assigned on Monday to be memorized, however the child can, for Friday's dictation test, the dyslexic student is faced with a frustrating predicament. Intelligent dyslexics frequently devise their own mnemonic systems for remembering spelling patterns. When is hen with a W in front. Mother is the with MO in front and R at the end. Today's curriculum involves the child with thousands of words at an ever-accelerating pace, soon produces impossible demands. Few individuals are clever enough to achieve literacy through mnemonic devices alone. One of the surest symptoms of auditory dyslexia is chronic erasing, crossing out, or marking over, overprinting, to correct written mistakes. A careful observer soon discerns why dyslexics stagger through writing activities so nervously. A dyslexic writer thinks out loud as he works, mumbling to himself, studying his encoded thoughts, recognizing or imagining spelling errors, erasing and then writing another combination of letter symbols, never sure he has spelled correctly. Handwriting is an intensely personal manifestation of any writer's self. This is especially so for the insecure student who has never been able to please his teachers. Every word committed to paper exposes the dyslexic to probable failure. He faces this chronic risk nervously. Therefore, he erases again and again, desperately trying to luck out with the correct combinations of letters, hoping to please his critics but not really expecting to succeed. Many dyslexic students attempt to hide their work as they write, a further indication of their dread of failure. Certain patterns of error characterize the spelling efforts of auditory dyslexics. Classroom teachers do not need to purchase special tests to diagnose this disability. 4 basic patterns of error will be apparent, regardless of the source of the dictation. And these errors are: transposed consonant elements. Dyslexics habitually change consonant patterns. Barn becomes bran. Play becomes palay, P-A-L-Y. And girl becomes grill in many cases, G-R-I-L. The student seldom recognizes these transpositions because of his basic difficulty in associating sound units with their written symbols. The next one is phonetic spellings. It is almost impossible for auditory dyslexics to apply phonic generalizations to spelling. When attempting to translate what they hear into written form, disabled students usually grope for literal translations. Teachers can detect this tendency if the student's garbled writing is read phonetically. In his attempts to encode familiar words, the dyslexic often writes refuse, R-E-E-F-E-W-S, for refuse, or G-A-R-D for guard, G-U-A-R-D. The old cliche that a child cannot spell cat is sometimes true. Many dyslexics write K-A-T for cat and C-I-N-D for kind. The next one is sound units omitted. The most significant indicator of auditory dyslexia in spelling is the habit of leaving out sound units within multisyllable words. This problem is sometimes called telescoping. The following examples illustrate this tendency. The teacher dictates remember, and the student writes remember. The teacher says extravagance, and the student writes extravagance. Teacher says tuberculosis, the student writes tuberculos. Candidacy, the student writes candidacy. Indefinitely, the student writes indefinitely. Next one is sound units added. This would be easier if you had a copy of the book, and it wouldn't be as tough for me to try to make sense of it in this video. But anyway, I'll do the best I can. Sound units added. A further characteristic of auditory dyslexia is the tendency to add unnecessary sound units when encoding words. This is also called perseveration. This tendency is illustrated by this specimen. Teacher says duck, student says ducky with a Y at the end. Teacher says pretty, student says padding. Teacher says party, the student writes pattering. Teacher says doll, student says dollkin. Teacher says blizzard, student writes blizzard. Teacher says successful, the student's response is successful. Immediate becomes immediate. Intimate becomes intimate. Legitimate becomes legitimate. And zephyr becomes zespher. Following is an effective 15-word dictation test devised by Dr. Ernest Jones. This simple diagnostic instrument allows a teacher or clinician to detect dyslexic symbols quickly and accurately, as illustrated by the following specimens. A more complete diagnostic picture for older students can be obtained from word lists utilizing multi-syllable words. A widely used standardized spelling test is from the Metropolitan Achievement Tests. And on the next few pages, you will see that lots of examples, which I'm going to skip. Let's see. On this page, it says, above are samples of spelling efforts by high school students, illustrating the fact that auditory dyslexia is not a problem which children simply outgrow. Okay, again, a lot more examples. A simple spelling test is presented in Appendix B of this book. This subtest of the JWST, which is the Jordan Written Spelling Test, the Jordan Written Screening Test, is a carefully arranged group of words which are commonly misspelled by dyslexics. In a few minutes of group time, the teacher can identify dyslexics without causing embarrassment. The following specimen illustrates how this dictation test reveals confusion with symbols as well as specific dyslexic tendencies to reverse, rotate, and transpose symbols. So those are all of the examples there. Once again, I'm going to skip that because it's just too hard to convey what he's showing here. Auditory dyslexia is a major handicap when disabled students attempt to write essay answers or produce original stories or themes. Dyslexic spelling is frequently associated with dysgraphia. It is not difficult to discover the symptoms of auditory dyslexia in a student's work. If classroom teachers analyze handwritten papers carefully. Following is an example of dyslexic writing by a bright girl in grade 4. Her autobiography was brushed aside as the work of a retarded child. That's using 70s terminology, I'm sorry. Until her teacher discovered that the girl was dyslexic, not retarded. This specimen illustrates a combination of auditory dyslexia, which is faulty sound symbol association, and dysgraphia, which is an inability to write legibly. Following the handwriting is a translation to illustrate the auditory dyslexic spelling flaws more clearly. So this is the student's copy, and then Dr. Jordan actually interprets or figures out what she's really saying. No one knows how many intelligent, creative students have been written off as academic failures because adults have not known how to identify perceptual impairment. Below is the work of an intelligent teenager who has been assigned to a class for mentally retarded children. When an alert teacher studied his written work, she discovered that auditory dyslexia and dysgraphia were his handicaps, not mental retardation. With corrective training, he completed a 4-year college program. Examples again. A poorly administered intelligence test labeled another boy with an IQ of 72. He was assigned to a class for borderline mentally retarded students in high school. When his dyslexic handicap was diagnosed, Larry's mental ability was correctly measured as above average. The following excerpt is from a manuscript he sent to a publisher. Again, another example. Larry sent 5 original story manuscripts to a major paperback publisher. To his astonishment, an enterprising editor deciphered the poor handwriting, which is his dysgraphia, and discovered the storylines that Larry had created. The editor returned the manuscripts with a lengthy critique, advising the boy what to do to improve the stories. He encouraged Larry to keep sending in story ideas, pointing out that the publisher was interested in purchasing fresh story material. With this unique incentive, Larry became interested in school achievement. It is a sobering thought that this bright young man had been labeled hopeless by teachers who had not recognized the potential behind his disability. Confusion with rhyming elements. An easily detected characteristic of auditory dyslexia is difficulty with rhyme. As a standard practice in elementary reading instruction, most teachers dwell on rhyming word entities to reinforce pupil awareness of certain aspects of phonics. Children handicapped by auditory dyslexia have great difficulty comprehending likenesses and differences in word elements. Awkwardness in identifying or reproducing rhymes is a major symptom of this disability. Educators probably make too great an issue of faulty rhyming ability. Aside from providing a convenient vehicle for phonics drills, rhyming skill is actually of little practical importance, so far as overall reading maturity is concerned. The ability to rhyme, however, does help many children master writing and spelling. It is unfortunate that children with poor rhyming skill are penalized. Item 18 on the JWST provides a simple test which allows the classroom teacher to detect faulty rhyming quickly. It should be remembered that many children who do oral rhyming activities well cannot do so in written form. To be sure of the extent of the disability, the teacher must use both oral and written activities. An example of this informal procedure is to ask the child to name all the words he can which rhyme with car. A child with normal perception should respond quickly with such words as jar, far, star, and bar. If the child finds this awkward, needing considerable time to ponder through each word before saying it, he may be handicapped by auditory dyslexia. This will be particularly evident if he names nonsense words such as dar, sar, nar, har, zar. Dyslexics often name words that begin alike but do not rhyme, such as car, care, core, cure. If the student is unable to match printed rhyming word forms, or if he is unable to write down familiar rhyming words by substituting beginning consonants, the teacher can reasonably be sure that an auditory dyslexic condition exists. Not 100%, but reasonably sure. The need for speaker to repeat. An especially irritating factor for many teachers is the dyslexic's need for repetition. Perceptually impaired students are insecure, particularly within an academic context. Auditory dyslexics are especially ill at ease in school because of their inability to comprehend sound symbol associations accurately. When writing from dictation, auditory to motor, or following a series of oral instructions, the dyslexic student simply cannot cope with a sustained flow of oral material. Because of his extremely slow rate in transcribing speech into written form, the auditory dyslexic loses the sequence of oral elements. Since they are never sure that they have heard accurately, dyslexics continuously ask the speaker to repeat. This habit produces friction in many learning situations. As disabled students chronically fall behind their peers, they tend to become disruptive. Chronic discipline problems often stem from the subtle, invisible presence of perceptual impairment. It is not unusual for dyslexics to be ostracized by their peers who are annoyed by their weird behavior and disruptive habits. Struggling to hold their social position creates chronic friction, which results in habitual conflict with adult authority. What begins as a perceptual flaw often leads to social jeopardy and public embarrassment. Yet little of this poor behavior is deliberate on the part of the dyslexics. Next section is subvocalizing during silent reading. A common stereotype of primary teachers is the crisp snapping of fingers, followed by shh. For many years, teachers have been taught that making vocal sounds during silent reading time is forbidden. Perhaps this practice does enhance learning for certain youngsters, although it is probably more beneficial to the teacher's frazzled nerves than to growth in reading skills. The truth is that dyslexic students must subvocalize if they are to succeed in translating writing into meaningful thought. Because of the underlying problem in associating sounds with written symbols, dyslexic readers must use a variety of stimulus channels to verify their decoding impressions. A child with no impairment can learn to decode through visual stimulus alone. A perceptually impaired child simply cannot. This frustrating need to reinforce visual cues with vocal response, along with the tactile impression of following words with a finger on the page, should not upset classroom teachers. As suggested in Chapter 6, it is not difficult to allow handicapped children to respond in their unorthodox ways if the teacher is aware of the problem. The important consideration is that dyslexic children must respond to reading in a variety of ways in order to check their impressions for accuracy. When the teacher snaps her fingers and hisses shh, she is cutting off an essential learning channel for auditory dyslexics. The results can only be increased frustration and failure. This need to reinforce symbol translation with vocal and tactile response also appears when auditory dyslexics are engaged in written assignments. These students need to subvocalize during spelling tests or while writing stories or essays. If dyslexics are allowed to cross-check their impressions of oral and written symbols, they can learn to correct many mistakes in reading and spelling. Difficulty blending parts into word wholes. In Chapter 1, an example was given of Mary's attempt to read aloud from a science text. The heart of her decoding handicap is faulty blending, which leaves her unable to cope with one of the major skills of accurate word analysis. The entire auditory dyslexic syndrome seems to focus upon Mary's problems in sounding out words as she reads. For example, a familiar word like bug, B-U-G, can become a major hurdle for the dyslexic reader. Laboriously, Mary breaks the word apart. Ba, ga. As this effort illustrates, she has never accurately identified the vocal production for the consonants B and G. When she feels somewhat confident that she has the separate elements in mind, Mary takes the plunge. Blug. Again, she has failed. Yellow comes out yellow, and bridge turns into burge. Children like Mary quickly grow defensive and insecure when forced to expose themselves to such public failure. Traditional instruction in phonics, which emphasizes blending, is usually beyond the comprehension of auditory dyslexics. It is possible for students like Mary to achieve success in simple word analysis after long-range drill and rote memorization of keyword patterns. This technique, called overteaching, saturates the child with intensive, highly structured practice with regular word forms until an automatic response occurs. Children like Mary seldom come to a true understanding of blending and word analysis, although they can often achieve an independent level of reading. Garbled pronunciation. Closely associated with the inability to blend is an embarrassing problem of garbled pronunciation. Auditory dyslexics find themselves the object of much laughter and teasing because of scrambled articulation. Classroom teachers can identify this aspect of dyslexia by devising lists of words for the child to repeat. This faulty articulation is also referred to as echolalia. So the normal pronunciation of a word, there's a little list over here. Oops. Okay. The normal pronunciation is aluminum, and the auditory dyslexic responds aluminum. Vinegar becomes vigoner. Animals becomes aminals. Olive becomes ollie. Baskets becomes backsets. Streamline becomes steamline. Spaghetti, the famous spaghetti, and I've heard this one for many kids, spaghetti becomes paschetti. Teachers and students have fun with pronunciation games which reveal echolalia, the garbled speech in which strategic sound units are transposed within words. For example, the teacher might devise a tongue twister race, keeping a diagnostic record of garbled speech tendencies of certain children. The emphasis must be upon fun, with no child feeling shame because of a twisted tongue. Below are some good word combinations for this informal diagnosis. apples and cinnamon, alum in vinegar, baskets of olives. She sells seashells on the seashore. That's a famous one. Aluminum animals, Mama's spaghetti, and transcontinental train. Older students enjoy such twisters as these. Political candidacy. I'm having trouble with that one. Political candidacy. Musketry maneuvers. Blueberry strudel. A crow flew over the river with a lump of raw liver. And 6 long, slim, sleek, slick, slender saplings. That's a tough one. Confusion with dictionary symbols. As would be expected, the auditory dyslexia syndrome makes traditional dictionary usage quite difficult for handicapped students. Problems in encoding and decoding make reading and writing hazardous activities. To expect dyslexics to interpret phonetic respellings, accent markings, and pronunciation code systems is beyond their reach as a rule. Intelligent, highly motivated students with perceptual limitations do manage to cope with the various codes found in reference materials. Most dyslexic children, however, cannot comprehend the variety of symbol systems they encounter in current dictionaries. This problem is further complicated by the current use of ambiguous schwa symbols showing vowel sounds in unaccented syllables. Dyslexic students can benefit from studies in word origins, multiple meanings, and syllable division, but to arrive at correct word pronunciations from dictionary keys is frequently impossible. A checklist of auditory dyslexia symptoms. I'm getting my tongue twisted a bit too. Let's try that again. Here's a checklist of auditory dyslexia symptoms. There is a danger in attaching labels to student behavior, particularly labels which denote disability or impaired ability to learn. Some students appear dyslexic who actually suffer hearing loss or who have never been taught good study habits. A speech impediment can produce poor articulation which resembles auditory dyslexia. In spite of these dangers, the following checklist can help classroom teachers identify clusters of behavior which are associated with auditory dyslexia. It is important that teachers withhold judgment until a definite syndrome of symptoms has been identified. Okay, and this is the test. Okay, it starts out with confusion with phonics, cannot distinguish differences in vowel sounds, does not perceive long vowel sounds, does not perceive short vowel sounds, does not perceive schwa vowel sounds, does not comprehend variant vowel sounds, cannot distinguish differences in consonant sounds, does not perceive differences between similar consonant sounds. Okay, and gives you different examples, and this is the complete test right here, which again I can't really give you on a video like this, but there it is. Okay, and let's see, again, Dr. Jordan includes references for further reading here. And that's the conclusion on the chapter on auditory dyslexia.